God's chosen ones. Hidden emotions are stirring the spirit realm. Because of you. There comes a moment, not a loud one, not a scheduled one, but a divine one, when what's been hidden starts to rise, when masks fall, when politeness cracks, when tension finally tells the truth. And maybe, just maybe, this is that moment for you, because you didn't walk into that room asking for conflict. You walked in carrying clarity, and clarity, beloved, is dangerous to people who live on illusion. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't start the storm. But you were the storm, the kind heaven sends, not to destroy, but to reveal. So if your presence has ever made liars panic, if your silence ever made manipulators squirm, if your truth made someone else's mask melt, this message is your confirmation. You weren't too much. You were too real for their fate. And now, heaven is flipping the script. They said you were too quiet, too intense, too much, too sensitive, too something. But what they never said out loud, what their eyes whispered when they thought you weren't looking, was this: you were the one they couldn't ignore. Not because you shouted, but because your presence spoke truths they couldn't unhear. Because your energy didn't bow to what was false. And every time you walked into the room, something in the atmosphere shifted. You didn't demand attention. You disrupted deception. You weren't the conflict. You were the confirmation. And deep down, they knew. This is the part of your story no one told you would come. The part where what's been building behind the scenes finally erupts into the open, where everything that's been silently brewing, the jealousy, the manipulation, the passive aggression, can no longer hide beneath politeness. And when it breaks, it doesn't break softly. It breaks like thunder. It breaks like a veil being torn in a temple, like a mirror shattering in the presence of truth. That moment came, or maybe it's coming. And when it does, it won't be because you snapped. It won't be because you stirred the pot. It'll be because God said, it's time. Because here's what they never understood about you. Your silence wasn't fear. It was fire under divine restraint. Your stillness wasn't weakness. It was strength refined in prayer. They mistook your calm for compliance. But what they didn't realize is that heaven was holding back your voice until it could roar with clarity. You weren't made to shout over noise. You were made to shift rooms in silence. This is not about ego. It's about energy. And your energy? It exposes what's real. Your presence is a holy mirror. And when people look at you, they see not just you, but everything in themselves they've been trying to avoid. The lies they told to keep power. The compromises they justified. The masks they wore to fit in. They weren't mad at you. They were terrified of what your truth unveiled. You became the moment they couldn't control. That's why the storm erupted. Not because of what you did, but because of what you represented. Just like Joseph. He didn't ask to be the favorite. He didn't force the dream. But the dream itself made people who were emotionally dishonest feel exposed. They didn't hate him for being wrong. They hated him for being right too early. You weren't wrong either. You were revealing just by being real. And now the storm has come. The confrontation that had to happen. The masks that had to fall. But let this be clear. You were not the cause. You were the catalyst. Because truth doesn't cause destruction. It reveals where false foundations were already cracking. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest. Luke 8:17. And you, chosen one, have always carried truth in your bones. You just didn't know how loud it would speak when you walked in the room. So if you've ever felt the tension rise when you entered the space, if you've ever felt the eyes shift, the smiles tighten, the conversations grow awkward, know this. That wasn't rejection. That was recognition. They knew, even if they'd never say it. You were the storm they hoped wouldn't come. The confrontation they couldn't prepare for. The mirror they'd prayed would never appear. And now heaven has pulled back the curtain, and what's being revealed is not just who they really are, but who you've been all along. Part 1. The shift you didn't ask for. It didn't happen all at once. There was no warning, no explosion, just a shift, a sacred, subtle change in the atmosphere, like the hush before a storm, like something spiritual had entered the room, long before anyone noticed it physically. But your spirit noticed. Oh yes, it did. You felt the weight in the air, the way eyes lingered a second too long, the way the energy tensed, like everyone was holding their breath, and pretending they weren't suffocating. You didn't ask for it. You didn't demand attention. You simply walked in. And when you did, something false in the room started to shiver. It wasn't your perfume. It wasn't your posture. It was your presence. The kind of presence that speaks before your mouth opens, that exposes the unspoken, that disrupts deception just by standing still. And suddenly you noticed. Conversations that stopped when you arrived. Smiles that no longer felt sincere. Questions loaded with accusation. Compliments laced with criticism. But you said nothing, because you thought maybe, just maybe, you were imagining it. You weren't. This was spiritual, and your soul knew it before your mind did. Like Joseph walking toward his brothers, unaware of their hidden plots, but aligned with a destiny they couldn't cancel. Like Esther entering the palace, chosen, yet surrounded by watchers who hated her anointing. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Matthew 5:14. That light, it wasn't just a gift. It was a weapon against every room that had made peace with the dark. You were never too much. You were simply the moment they could no longer suppress. And now, everything is starting to shift. Not because you forced it, but because heaven whispered, it's time. Part 2. When presence preaches louder than words. You didn't say a word. You didn't defend yourself. You didn't interrupt. You didn't expose anyone. You simply stood there. And in that stillness, everything changed. His presence, like yours, doesn't need volume to shift a room. It carries a frequency that exposes what's fake and amplifies what's hidden. They called you quiet, but your silence was louder than their most polished speeches. Your stillness, it was a sermon. Your restraint, a revelation. Because when God puts his hand on someone, when his spirit rests on a soul, even their breath becomes prophetic. You didn't have to prove anything. Your walk preached. Your peace prophesied. Your posture pierced every layer of illusion they tried to maintain. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. They thought stillness was surrender, but stillness was your strategy, and God was moving through it, because truth doesn't scream, it stands, and when it stands long enough, everything false begins to fall. That's what your presence did. It didn't stir conflict. It stirred conviction. They weren't reacting to you. They were reacting to the mirror you became. And in that holy quiet, God was speaking to you, to them, to the entire atmosphere. And what he said couldn't be unheard. Part 3. The mask and the mirror. It wasn't just awkward. It wasn't just tension. It was revelation. Because when your spirit entered the room, so did the mirror. And people who wear masks hate mirrors. They weren't offended by what you said. They were undone by what you reflected. Every hidden motive, every unspoken envy, every carefully maintained illusion, suddenly felt seen. You didn't force them to look, but your presence made it impossible to look away. That's the danger of being chosen. Your light doesn't just glow, it reveals. Your energy doesn't just uplift, it unmasks. For the word of God is living and active. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. Hebrews 4:12. And when you walk with God, even your silence carries his word. Even your stillness cuts through pretense like a blade. They weren't afraid of you. They were afraid of what their soul whispered. Every time you entered the space, they see me. They know. They carry something I've been hiding from. And so, the masks began to crack. The fake smiles, the shallow praise, the carefully choreographed distance, all of it started to crumble under the quiet pressure of your authenticity. Because truth doesn't chase. It doesn't beg to be seen. It simply stands. And when it stands long enough, everything false must bow or break. You were never trying to expose them. You were just being real. And that was the one thing they couldn't pretend around. You were the mirror. And mirrors don't lie. Part 4. Buried tension, sacred eruption. This wasn't just an argument. This wasn't miscommunication. This was a spiritual eruption. And the truth is, it had been building for a while. Not in their words, but in their energy. The tension? It was never about what was said. It was about what had been stuffed down for too long. About all the truths they buried beneath polished manners and fake peace. You felt it before you saw it, in the side glances, in the shift in tone, in the weight that settled into every conversation. When you entered the room, you could sense it. This was going to break. And then, it did. But don't misunderstand it. The shouting, the sudden anger, the icy silence, that wasn't about you. It was about everything in them that had finally run out of room to hide. Your presence didn't cause the eruption. It gave permission for what was suppressed to finally surface. Because when truth enters a space, everything false eventually combusts. Even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. Psalm 139:12. Like Joseph's brothers, they didn't hate you because of something you did. They hated what you represented. Vision, divine appointment, the reflection of what they could have been if they had made different choices. They weren't fighting your behavior, they were fighting your being. And the eruption wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough, because the pressure that builds in silence always finds a release. And when it does, don't call it drama, call it deliverance. It may have looked messy, but heaven was pulling back the veil, and now the truth is out, and nothing false can survive what's coming next. Part 5. You were the live wire. You didn't yell, you didn't point fingers, you didn't need to, because your spirit carried a voltage they didn't know how to handle. You were the live wire. Heaven plugged into a room full of spiritual short circuits. And the moment you arrived, everything that had been barely holding together snapped. It wasn't your attitude. It wasn't your tone. It wasn't even your words. It was the truth that radiated from your being. Like electricity in a storm, they tried to keep things cordial, but you weren't sent to be cordial. You were sent to be consecrated. And anything not anchored in truth can't stand near someone lit by God. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. They thought they could outmaneuver you, outnumber you, outtalk you, but they couldn't disconnect the fact that your very existence exposed their system. Your favor challenged their formula. Your presence confronted their pretense. And your silence shouted louder than their control ever could. Because when someone walks in truth, every false narrative begins to malfunction. They thought you were just a guest, but God made you a conduit, a vessel that sparks change, a current of conviction, a holy interruption to their deception. So no, you weren't the problem. You were the live wire that proved their comfort was built on a lie. And when you touched the atmosphere, What wasn't real had no choice but to collapse. Part 6. The exposure you didn't grasp. The exposure you didn't grasp. Believe it. If I couldn't believe it. You didn't ask for this. You never wanted a spotlight. You never needed applause. You just wanted peace. But when you carry divine truth, peace is sometimes the price you pay for walking into places where deception rules the room. And so, exposure came. Not because you went looking for it, but because God sent it. The screenshots started surfacing. The whispers became confessions. The coincidences became confirmation. Suddenly, what was hidden was everywhere. You didn't leak the truth, but the truth leaked through them, because deception has an expiration date, and it was finally time. For there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. Luke 12:2. This wasn't revenge. This was revelation, because you didn't need to defend yourself. You didn't need to scream, "I told you so." Heaven was already speaking, and it was speaking in a language no lie could outrun. The ones who smiled in your face were suddenly silent. The ones who threw stones were suddenly exposed by their own fingerprints. God didn't just let the truth out, He let it walk through the front door and sit in the middle of the room until everyone had to look it in the eye. And you just stayed still. Because some vindications don't come through victory dances. They come through divine documentation. They thought silence protected them, but all it did was give truth time to prepare the stage. You didn't request exposure, but when you walk with heaven, truth arrives right on time. Part 7. God let the curtain fall. It didn't happen in chaos. It didn't come with screaming or slander. No, God let the curtain fall quietly, and when it did, what they built in shadow was suddenly standing in full light. No hiding, no excuses, no more pretending, because when heaven pulls back the veil, truth doesn't need an introduction. It walks in uninvited and takes its rightful seat. This was never your fight. You didn't orchestrate this moment, but God did. He watched them scheme. He watched them smear. He watched them manipulate and smile while they did it. And then He whispered, "Enough. Be sure your sin will find you out." Numbers 32:23. They thought they had time to clean it up, to shift the story, to rewrite the narrative. But grace has limits when it's being used to cover manipulation. And so the curtain dropped, and what stood behind it wasn't holy. It was the truth of who they really were, revealed, raw, unedited. You didn't have to force it. You didn't have to expose anyone, because when God pulls the curtain, He exposes both heart and motive, not for destruction, but for correction, not to humiliate, but to make room for what's real. So if the masks are falling around you now, if the stories no longer line up, if people are squirming when they used to swagger, don't gloat, don't panic, don't intervene, just stay still. The curtain's already down. And now, the only thing left is the truth that refuses to be hidden again. Part 8. Their collapse was internal. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was internal. The collapse didn't come with cameras. It came in quiet moments, at red lights, in late night thoughts, in mirrors they can't look into anymore, because what broke them wasn't the exposure. It was the truth they refused to face, now echoing inside them, with no way to shut it off. You see, they didn't fall apart because of your presence. They fell apart because of themselves, because denial has a shelf life, and guilt has a voice, and eventually, it speaks louder than any lie. They told themselves you were overreacting, that you were dramatic, that you were too intense, too sensitive. But now, your stillness is haunting them. Your silence is convicting them. Your calm is louder than their excuses ever were. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. Proverbs 26:27. That's what's happening now. The pit they dug with gossip, manipulation, and fake smiles, they're sinking into it and realizing too late that you were never the enemy. You were the mirror. They're not mad at you anymore. They're mad at themselves, but their pride won't let them admit it. So they keep scrambling, blaming, deflecting, trying to maintain a crumbling facade. But it's not working, because the collapse isn't external, it's spiritual, and it cannot be escaped. You, on the other hand, you didn't need to retaliate. You didn't even need to explain, because while they're collapsing under the weight of dishonesty, you're rising in the strength of integrity. Their unraveling isn't your burden. It's heaven's justice. Doing what only heaven can do. Part 9. You kept walking. You could have clapped back. You could have exposed receipts. You could have pulled every string and crushed the narrative. But you didn't. You kept walking. And that, chosen one, was your greatest revenge. Not because you were weak, but because you were wise. Because you knew that your future was too sacred to waste on proving a point. Because you knew that the moment you stooped to their level, you'd forfeit the throne God had already prepared for you. That's why Joseph didn't go back for revenge. He went back with revelation. The same brothers who threw him in a pit stood shaking in front of him years later, expecting judgment. And what did he say? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Genesis 50:20. That's you now. You see clearly. You discern deeply. And because of that, you move differently. You no longer need to be heard, because you've already been healed. You no longer need to be understood, because heaven already vindicated you. You kept walking, not out of pride, but out of purpose. And now the same people who thought they had the last word are watching you become the living proof that obedience wins louder than opinions. Let them talk. Let them twist. Let them wonder why you never fought back. You don't need to defend yourself. When destiny is doing it for you, you kept walking, and heaven kept building. And now, you're not just surviving, you're leading. Part 10. The storm was your assignment. You thought you were under attack. You thought the storm came to break you. But God sent me to tell you, the storm was your assignment. You weren't just in the middle of spiritual warfare, you were the reason it started. Because heaven placed you in the center, to shift the spiritual atmosphere. You were never just a target. You were a trigger, a holy interruption, a divine disruption, anointed to unsettle everything that had grown too comfortable in darkness. And yet, as it came with backlash, with betrayal, with being misunderstood, misrepresented, even isolated. But what felt like punishment was actually positioning. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Matthew 5:14. You were never sent to blend in. You were sent to break cycles, to be the one who walks into generational deception and says, it stops here. To be the mirror, the voice, the vessel, not for drama, but for divine order. So if it felt like your presence caused tension, if things unraveled when you showed up, if people turned cold, started shifting, that wasn't random. It was recalibration. God was using your assignment to expose what couldn't go forward anymore. He didn't come to destroy. He came to reveal, to realign, to awaken. And even though they blamed you for the storm, you were the only one in the room, anointed to carry it. Let them say what they will. Let the world spin its narrative, because heaven already knows. You were assigned to shake what was fake, and you did it flawlessly. Part 11. Now they feel it. Now that the room is quiet, now that the crowd has moved on, now they feel it. Not just the exposure, not just the fallout, but the weight of what they ignored, dismissed, and tried to discredit. The presence they once minimized now lingers in their memory, and it's louder in silence than it ever was in speech. They replay conversations in their head. They second-guess their reactions. They wonder if they should have listened. If maybe, just maybe, you were right all along. But pride won't let them say it out loud. So instead, they avoid your name. They shift the topic. They watch from a distance. But they feel it. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14. You didn't clap back. You didn't expose them. But somehow truth did. And now it hangs in the air. Like an echo, they can't escape. That moment they lied. That moment they laughed behind your back. That moment they tried to make you feel small. It's haunting them in the very places they once felt powerful. Because guilt has a voice, conviction has a pulse, and heaven has a long memory. And now they feel it. In the heaviness of the spaces you left. In the awkwardness of rooms where you're no longer present. In the tension that follows their name. When your name is brought up in conversation, you didn't pray for their downfall. You prayed for your peace. And now your peace is testifying louder than any defense you could have made. Let them feel it, not out of spite, but out of sacred justice. Is because what they feel now isn't your wrath. It's God's response. Part 12. You were born for this clarity. After all the noise, after the silence, after the storm and the stares and the spiritual unraveling, you're still here, but you're not the same. Something shifted, something sharpened, something inside you stood up and said, I will no longer explain who God has already confirmed I am. But because now, chosen one, you see clearly. You no longer confuse closeness with loyalty. You no longer entertain shallow peace to avoid necessary truth. You no longer apologize for clarity that cost you everything to carry. You are no longer the version of you that second-guessed red flags and begged to be understood. You are walking in a new frequency, a new filter, a new fire. And this fire does not burn bridges. It illuminates boundaries. The unfolding of your words gives light. It gives understanding to the simple. Psalm 119, 130. Your discernment is your gift. Your clarity is your calling. And the truth you carry is no longer something you try to soften for comfort. Because you were born for this clarity. It's not too sharp. It's not too much. It is exactly what this next level requires. You were always the light. But now you're unapologetically lit. No more shrinking. No more smoothing over deception to keep the peace. No more twisting yourself to fit in rooms. God never intended for you to stay in. You were born to see clearly, to lead boldly, to walk in truth even when it's lonely. This is not the season of compromise. This is the season of kingdom clarity. And you're ready. Because the storm wasn't meant to blind you. It baptized you into vision. They thought they could dismiss you. They thought they could bury the truth. They thought they could twist the story and still stand tall in the center of it. But God had a different ending in mind. And now that the dust has settled, the room is clear, the masks are down, you remain, not wounded, but wiser, not bitter, but bold, not broken, but reborn. This was never about revenge. This was about refinement. Because God didn't expose them to elevate your ego. He exposed them to establish your clarity, to draw the line, to break the cycle, to unchain the version of you that kept apologizing for carrying too much truth. This is your final confirmation. You didn't start the storm, but you were the shift. You were the voice their lies couldn't mute. You were the presence their masks couldn't survive. You were the answer they didn't want, but heaven sent anyway. You didn't just survive the exposure. You outlived it. And now, you're ascending, not in applause, but in authority. Not for revenge, but for reign. Peace without truth is just performance. Choose alignment. Some storms come to reveal who can't go with you into your next season. Your silence was never weakness. It was your strategy of surrender, and heaven moved through it. What exposed them elevated you. If this word unlocked something you've been carrying in silence, if you know you didn't come this far to go back into old patterns, type in the comments, "I was the shift." Let that be your declaration. Let it be your spiritual signature on this season. Share this with someone who's been misunderstood for carrying truth. They need to know. Their clarity isn't a curse. It's their calling. And if this message felt like a mirror, if you want more people to receive this kind of clarity and healing, support the mission, not for hype, but for hope. Details in the description. You didn't break the room. You walked in, and truth did the rest. And from this moment forward, you walk different. You see sharper. You love deeper. You guard wiser. You don't just carry light now. You are the storm, and the clarity after it. Welcome to your new level. You are the mirror. You are the message. You are the movement. And the next chapter, heaven already wrote it, with your name on it.